Yes, a key indicator for gauging whether it's alt season. This Altseason index has risen to 71. Generally, when this index is above 75, it's considered an official entry into alt season, where altcoins show relative strength. The fact that it's now at 71 means we're almost at that threshold. Simply put, it means that over the past 90 days, the proportion of altcoins that have risen more than Bitcoin is at about 71%. This can be interpreted as a signal that money may soon flow into altcoins across the market. In fact, Bitcoin dominance has recently broken below a trend line that had held for over 2 years, dropping to around 58%. In August alone, Bitcoin lost about 4 percentage points of its market share, showing that altcoins are gradually increasing their presence. I wish the term alt season would become more familiar and arrive quickly, but in any case, the data shows that the market is currently at the beginning stage of an alt season. Now everyone is watching closely to see if we will officially enter a true alt season by breaking through the index level of 75. Currently, the most prominent leading coin in the altcoin market is Ripple XRP. If you look at the Total 3 index, which represents the total market capitalization of all cryptocurrencies except for Bitcoin and Ethereum, the Total 3 chart is attempting a breakout by breaking through a decisive resistance line. This is being interpreted as a sign that the entire altcoin market is about to enter a new upward phase, and in particular, XRP is being recognized as the coin that played a prominent role in this chart. Raoul Pal too has recently said that he can't take his eyes off the global cryptocurrency chart led by XRP, highlighting the significance of XRP's movements. Raoul Pal has assessed that altcoins are on the verge of an explosive move, and as evidence he emphasized the strong bullish signals in the market cap chart Total 3, which is being led by XRP. In fact, as of early September, the current price of XRP is consistently hovering around the significant $3 level, clearly showing strong signs of actively trying to firmly hold at its highest level in many years. Its impressive dominance within the broader altcoin market has also substantially increased over this period. So why is XRP being regarded as the frontrunner of the alt season? Let's take a look at some of the background behind this. First, XRP became the first major altcoin in the industry to resolve regulatory risks by receiving a court ruling that it is not an unregistered security through its legal dispute with the US SEC. There is analysis suggesting that, with the lawsuit against the SEC expected to be fully resolved in 2025, the barriers to entering the institutional framework have been removed. Thanks to this legal certainty, institutional investors are also relatively comfortable accepting XRP. In fact, with regulatory clarity, institutional support, and real-world adoption all coming together, XRP is establishing itself as the leading contender in the next-generation altcoin rally. It seems that this kind of assessment resonates not just because of a feeling, but for good reason. XRP has also recently been gaining attention as an underlying asset for custody products such as ETFs that hold real-world assets. In particular, anticipation for the imminent launch of a spot XRP ETF has further heightened expectations in the market. These ETFs are expected to operate by directly holding actual Ripple XRP, so if they are approved, institutional funds will purchase and custody XRP. This could lead to increased demand for XRP and improved liquidity, providing a positive foundation for price appreciation. Meanwhile, from the perspective of global financial infrastructure, major financial institutions such as Japan's SBI are adopting XRP as a bridge asset for international remittances, and the use of XRP in custody and payment networks is increasing. Ripple launched a dollar-pegged stablecoin, RLUSD, based on the XRP ledger at the end of last year, and it is currently attracting significant attention in the market. This stablecoin serves as a substitute for the dollar, making payments and remittances easier on the XRP network. In fact, the Australian electric vehicle company Tembo has started receiving international transaction payments in RLUSD instead of traditional bank transfers. Through this, they're able to process international remittances almost instantly and with dramatically reduced fees. What's interesting is that this company chose to use only RLUSD, which is not volatile, as a payment method instead of XRP. Since value stability is crucial at the payment stage, they use a stablecoin for transactions, but the company is actually strategically purchasing large amounts of XRP on the back end to use as reserve assets. In other words, we can see this as a two-track dual strategy, using stablecoins for payments and XRP for value investment. This kind of expansion of the XRP-based stablecoin ecosystem is also being seen as a positive factor, as it broadens the real-world use cases for XRP and ultimately strengthens the demand base for XRP. In the derivatives market as well, there is a clear trend of bullish bets on XRP. According to PowerTrade, a global crypto options platform, 68% of the options trades on their platform in August were call options, in other words, bullish bets. In particular, there has been a significant increase in the buying of call options expiring in December this year for major altcoins such as Solana and XRP. In the case of XRP, the sharp rise in open interest for call options clearly indicates that investors are expecting the price to go up. Generally, when there is high demand for call options in the options market and the call-put skew is tilted toward calls, it means that market participants are that much more confident about future price increases. In this way, the strong investor sentiment toward XRP derivatives is further reinforcing its status as a leading asset. So, to sum up the clearer regulatory environment, the establishment of channels for institutional capital inflow, the expanding use cases through stablecoins, and the strong bullish bets in the options market, these technical and fundamental strengths are what are propelling XRP to emerge as the leader in this cycle. Raoul Pal also mentioned positively that with all these factors in place, XRP has finally ended its period of waiting and has now entered a full-fledged growth phase. He analyzed that the XRP chart is once again forming a strong triangular consolidation pattern, similar to what it showed before previous major rallies, and is now on the verge of breaking out to the upside. Raoul Pal compared the current cryptocurrency market to a waiting room, saying that Ethereum has already rushed out first, Solana and Sui are ready to follow, and now XRP is about to cross the threshold of the waiting room as well. In short, the major movement in the altcoin market led by XRP is just beginning, and many investors are now paying close attention with the expectation that the real altcoin party might be coming. Now let's analyze some hypothetical scenarios. The trigger for an altcoin market rally is ultimately Bitcoin, so if by the end of this year Bitcoin's price rises in line with various forecasts to between $150,000 and $200,000, how high could XRP go? Since XRP is currently trading around $3, this is a topic that any XRP investor would naturally be interested in. Of course, we can't say anything for certain, but perhaps we can estimate an intuitive range using a scenario matrix based on several conditions. First, scenario A. If Bitcoin rises to around $150,000 and the altcoin season index is below 75, which would be considered an early phase, then we can expect XRP to experience a relatively moderate upward trend as well. In this case, the analysis suggests that we can look at a target price for XRP of around $5. Compared to the current price of $3, this would be a 60 to 70% increase, which seems like a reasonable and achievable expectation. In fact, during the mini bull market at the end of 2024, while Bitcoin rose by 30%, XRP skyrocketed by 400%, setting a precedent. Given that XRP's volatility has historically been much greater than Bitcoin's, if Bitcoin rises by 50%, it's entirely realistic to assume that XRP could rise by 1.5 to 2 times as much. Just recalling last year's end, we can see that this is entirely possible. I think it's inevitable that such expectations will overflow. Scenario B. Let's say Bitcoin hits an all-time high of around $175,000 and the Altseason index passes 75, officially entering Altseason. At this point, we can assume that the influx of funds into altcoins would be much stronger than in Scenario A. XRP could break through its previous high and potentially draw a much steeper upward curve. Even conservatively, we could expect a range of $6 to $7, although reaching $17,500 for Bitcoin is no easy feat. Still, if the situation aligns as described, it might be possible. This would be a twofold increase from the current price, but during an alt season, that could actually be considered an average rate of increase. The atmosphere in the options market, as mentioned earlier, also supports this scenario. Many traders are betting that XRP will surge significantly by the end of this year, and as a result, they are holding a large number of call options. If market sentiment heats up like this, and this scenario becomes reality, it's possible that XRP could break through its psychological resistance level, which is currently identified as $4, and settle in the $6 to $7 range. Of course, this is a scenario that can be considered when these two conditions are met: Bitcoin reaching $175,000 and the Altseason index breaking through 75. Scenario C. To sum it up in one word, you could say that the entire market is going crazy. If Bitcoin finally reaches the astonishing milestone of $200,000 and the Altseason index soars above 80, entering a state of complete overheating, then XRP's potential for growth will be at its highest. Well, not just XRP, but all the major altcoins could end up going wild in this kind of situation. In this phase, a speculative frenzy could sweep across all altcoins, and even top market cap coins like XRP could see massive inflows of capital. Even conservative analysts are saying that if this happens, if Bitcoin actually breaks through $200,000, XRP could rise to around $8. That's the kind of outlook they're presenting. In fact, analysts like Ash Crypto, who has 1.9 million followers, have set XRP's target price at $5 to $8 if Bitcoin approaches $200,000 by the end of the year. This is actually a more conservative figure compared to some other extreme bulls. For example, analysts like Mario Norfol predicted that XRP would reach $10 if Bitcoin hits $225,000, and a trader named Rect Fencer even mentioned a range from $8.20 to $9. In this way, the $8 range is now being regarded as a somewhat realistic and reasonable estimate if Bitcoin reaches $200,000. However, for XRP to enter the double-digit range, like over $10, it may require not just XRP-specific issues, but also market FOMO or additional positive catalysts. Of course, these scenarios are not based on complex mathematical formulas, but rather on intuitive forecasts. So rather than breaking down the numbers too minutely, I think it makes more sense to understand XRP's approximate range based on Bitcoin's price levels and the overall market sentiment. Ultimately, the key is how high Bitcoin can go and how strong the capital rotation into altcoins will be. Looking at past cycles, after Bitcoin rises to a certain level and then moves sideways or undergoes a correction, funds tend to flow into altcoins. At the peak of the alt season, major altcoins like XRP have often shown several times more momentum compared to Bitcoin. Therefore, if Bitcoin enters a strong bull market approaching $200,000, I really hope we get to see something like this. If such a situation occurs, scenarios like XRP reaching $5 or even $8 could be considered, based on data and historical precedents. Next, let's go over some key indicators that can help us determine in real time whether we've entered an altcoin season. In reality, checking these indicators in real time as things happen is not easy unless you're a full-time trader, but I think it's still helpful from a research perspective to know that these methods exist and how to check them. First is whether the total 3 chart has settled above the neckline. Whether the total 3 market cap chart breaks out is the most direct technical signal for determining an altcoin season. Recently, total 3 has broken through a major resistance line, so in the coming days or weeks it will be important to watch whether this index holds that breakout line as a support level. In other words, if during a correction, total 3 holds firm and does not plunge back below the previous resistance level, it can be seen as a clear positive signal for an altcoin season. On the other hand, if the breakout fails and the index returns to its previous position, the altcoin season may be put on hold for a while. At this point, since there is already analysis suggesting that total 3 has shown a trend reversal signal, I think the key going forward will be whether it can maintain its support. Earlier I mentioned that there is high demand for XRP call options in the options market, and the metric that quantifies this is the options skew. It is an indicator that shows the relative strength of put options compared to call options. Currently, it is known that the implied volatility of XRP call options is higher than that of put options, and the total open interest in options is also reportedly on a significant upward trend. This means that the market is paying a higher premium for XRP's upside, which is a natural phenomenon in a bull market. To gauge in real time whether it's an alt season, you can simply watch whether this option skew continues to favor calls. For example, if the price of XRP fluctuates sharply, but the call buying momentum remains strong and the premium is maintained, it means that major players are still confident in XRP's rise. On the other hand, if demand for call options drops sharply and the proportion of puts increases even as the price rises, it could be a signal for a correction. Therefore, keeping an eye on the XRP option order book on option exchanges like Deribit can also be helpful. When an alt season is in full swing, buying pressure concentrates on certain coins, and the order book depth also changes. Especially for large cap coins like XRP, it's useful to watch whether major exchanges are forming buy walls. For example, if you observe the order book on Binance or Coinbase and see a thick layer of buy orders just below the current price, this can be seen as a strong signal that investors are very determined to buy XRP every time it dips. In such cases, even if there is a sharp correction, the downside is likely to be firmly supported, and this can provide a foundation for further upward movement. On the other hand, if the order book becomes thin, the price can fluctuate even with small amounts of volume, so caution is needed. You also need to check the trading volume. If during a price uptrend, the trading volume continues to increase compared to the previous high, it can be considered a healthy rise. However, if the price rises without an increase in volume, it may be seen as a short-term overheating. At the beginning of an alt season, trading volume usually starts to surge explosively, so keeping an eye on the global trading volume trends of XRP will definitely be helpful. Anyway, when you put together all these analyses, you can see that XRP currently has the right combination of policy, market, and sentiment, making it a leading asset at the forefront of the alt season. This means that with regulatory risks resolved, the policy foundation is solid, the market fundamentals are supported by real institutional demand, and investors' psychological expectations are also quite high. These 3-in-1 conditions are the very factors that major altcoins typically had in place during past cycles when they experienced explosive rallies. The fact that XRP is currently on that trajectory is quite significant and meaningful. However, the key variable that we must not forget is, after all, still Bitcoin. Ultimately, it is Bitcoin's movement that determines whether the alt season will begin and continue. Bitcoin needs to rise sufficiently to attract new capital into the market, and then, after a period of stable sideways movement or a gentle correction, only then can a full-scale rotation of funds into altcoins truly take place. Conversely, if Bitcoin unexpectedly plunges, or if the overall market contracts due to a worsening macroeconomic environment, the alt season could evaporate into thin air. That's why it's important to keep a close eye on Bitcoin indicators and global financial trends, and inevitably, we have to conduct thorough research. Well, honestly, I think the answer is already set. I hope you can take all these different situations into account and maintain a wise investment stance.